Colin, thank you for accepting this podcast. First of all, I would like to say that I know Colin for a long time, much before Colin knew me, because whenever I was reading so much amazing science papers, there was always this guy coming up. I was reading about dopamine, and there was Colin. Then I was reading about serotonin, there was Colin. Then there was hierarchy taxonomy of psychopathology, there was also Colin. Then 10 aspects came out, and I was like, this is so amazing because there is too many if you go below the big five to remember, And there was Colin again, and I said, like, this guy is a genius, like true genius. And I was thinking he is like the back engine behind this whole Jordan Peterson 10 aspects know myself. So I was thinking that he's the brain, the actual brain who discovered these golden, precious, things in psychology. So I started to bother him with so many different questions and learning from him. And I'm sorry about that. But now, Colin, this podcast is called Mythbusters, Psychology Mythbusters. And if you can say a few words about yourself, and then we will start busting some myths.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for that nice introduction. Yeah, it is true that I was the one who created the questionnaire, the Big Five Aspect Scales that Jordan Peterson used on his website. And I did my PhD with him. So he was my mentor in graduate school. And then I went on to do a postdoc position at Yale, where I learned how to do neuroimaging research because I was already interested in neuroscience when I was a graduate student. And I started working on some genetic research as a graduate student. But I really wanted to get into some kind of way to study the brain more directly. And so I had 3 years at Yale as a postdoc where I learned how to do MRI research. And then I got a position as a professor at the University of Minnesota in the psychology department. And that's where I am still. And my research in general just focuses on both the structure and the sources of personality. So I want to know what are the important personality traits and how are they organized? And then I also want to know where do they come from, especially, where do they come from in the brain? What are the brain systems that produce them?
So basically, we are talking not only about the structure of the brain, but functional aspects of the brain.
Right, exactly. When I say the structure of personality, I mean, the way in which traits are organized. Yeah. But in terms of the brain, yes, I'm actually interested in function much more than in structure, because brain structure is really only relevant to psychology when it affects the brain's functioning. Right? Exactly. If you have one part of the brain is bigger, but it doesn't have any effect on function, then who cares, right? Then it won't affect your personality or your psychology.
So actually, you are looking with we say big data, using big data to see how the brain function, different parts of the brain, no matter how big they are connected, interconnected, and communicating with each other. And how many of them you found for us? I mean, so far, these interesting circles, as I imagine them.
Yes. How many discoveries have we made about the brain? Well, hopefully we've made a few that will hold up. If we think about the big five traits, then the ones that probably have the best evidence and the most information about them in terms of brain function are neuroticism and extroversion. And that's because those are fundamentally reflecting sensitivity to punishment and threat for neuroticism and sensitivity to reward for extroversion. And, we know a lot about the brain's punishment systems and reward systems because we can easily study them in other species, and they're similar, even across all mammals. So I think that the most solid findings in personality neuroscience are about those traits, but partly because of that, I was really interested in trying to understand the other ones where we don't know so much. And so I've done a lot of research in my lab trying to understand the biological basis of conscientiousness, and agreeableness and openness to experience and intellect.
So, is it true? This is just my thinking that some dopamine neurons react more to social rewards, while other react more to information. As
Yes, although I would say the ones that you were saying react to social rewards, it's not just social rewards, it's any kind of concrete, tangible reward. It could be,
okay,
many of those for a human being are social because the social world is so important for us. But an extrovert would also be more sensitive to like monetary reward.
of
Uh,
course.
or food reward, let's say. It's anything that's kind of, those kind of evolved concrete thing. I mean, money obviously isn't an evolved reward, but it is basically symbolizing our ability to access the things that we want in this concrete way.
But if there are five or six, I don't know, seven different kinds of dopamine in the neurons, are there those who are more interested in like money, information, and others that are more interested exactly in people and interactions?
No, I don't think so. So the way that this works is that there are five different types of dopamine receptor. But as
Receptor.
far as we know, there are really only two different kinds of dopamine neuron. And one of them responds to the value of rewards, whether you get them or don't get them when you expect to. And the other one responds to information and the possibility of gaining information. So actually, money is more like social reward. Money
Social.
goes with social reward because
Okay.
it has a tangible value, right? Whereas information is interesting because it could be information about something bad, but it would actually not trigger the reward system for
But
dopamine, the value system,
curiosity.
but it would trigger the salience or information system of dopamine.
Okay. Salient meaning that it will come to conscientious filter.
Salience meaning that it is about paying attention to
Yes.
information, something that might be informative, that might help you learn about your environment so then you can adapt to it better.
So we can come to the first myth that I would like to talk about, that dopamine and serotonin are the happiness hormones.
Right. So you see this in the popular press a lot. Sometimes you see that dopamine is the thing associated with feeling happy. Sometimes you see that serotonin is the thing that's associated with feeling happy. Sometimes people call them hormones. They're not actually hormones. They're neurotransmitters.
Neuroregulars.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're neurotransmitters, and also you can call them neuromodulators or regulators. And that's because they act in the brain psychologically. Hormones are things that circulate primarily through the bloodstream as signaling messengers. But the important thing, of course, is about the happiness question. And so, with both of them, I think it's understandable why people have gotten the wrong idea about them. Right. So dopamine responds to things that might have value in a way that makes us excited to move toward them, to approach those goals, to get the good things. But so it's more about the desire for something good. It's not about enjoying or liking the good thing. So people describe the difference between wanting and liking, and dopamine creates wanting, but it doesn't create liking. So what creates liking is actually the endogenous opiate system, so the opioids like endorphins. And they interact with the dopamine system, but dopamine by itself just creates wanting. And so, you can actually, if you really want something, that's dopamine being released. But if you can't get it, then you may actually feel bad at the same time that you want it, right? So dopamine is not necessarily associated with pleasure and happiness. Now, for serotonin, one of the things that serotonin reacts to is satiety, which means when you've had enough, like you eat a big meal and then you feel full and you don't want to keep eating. Serotonin is actually signaling, okay, we've had enough. We can now inhibit the behavior. We can stop doing the behavior. But again, it's not producing the happy feeling of eating a lot and then feeling nice and full. That's once again the opiate system, which is responsible for all the feelings of pleasure that we have. The
So this
serotonin system is
doesn't increase like feeling of pleasure 10 times. It
serotonin actually, yes, tends to decrease positive emotions as well as negative emotions because it's more of a stabilizing function. It's more inhibitory. It's basically making us be less impulsive, less reactive, more stable and on track. And so that's what serotonin is for, not
So it's
for
more
pleasure.
like can we frame it like this? It just helps you to not be unhappy, not to make you happy.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable way to put it. It blocks the kind of strong negative emotions, which is why it can help some people who are depressed or anxious. But it does not create positive emotion. It's not a happiness chemical.
Yes, yes. I always do this metaphor. If you have a laptop, if you don't have a laptop in your office, then you might feel terrible because you cannot do your job. But if somebody gives you a laptop, it doesn't necessarily mean that you will be a happy person.
Right. Just means you can do what you need to do. And serotonin is really about making sure that the organism can keep doing what it needs to do and doesn't get disrupted or distracted by different kinds of impulses or distractions.
So actually, when you say opioid receptors are in the whole brain practically, and when people use like, I won't say it, well, I will say it, like heroin, they then actually do feel more pleasure and happiness.
Yes.
Even
So
though it's not produced biologically naturally and it's extremely dangerous.
that's correct. So some of the most dangerous drugs are the opiate drugs like heroin or fentanyl, and those act on the opiate system. There are endogenous opiates, right? The brain naturally produces certain chemicals that are related to things like heroin or morphine, but it's the brain's own version of those, and it's designed to respond to these receptors, which are actually not spread throughout the whole brain. They're mostly
Okay.
located in the limbic system and especially the nucleus accumbens. And that's But when you take a drug like heroin, it triggers those receptors extremely strongly. And so it creates this kind of temporary sensation that you have just gotten like the best possible thing imaginable. Everything is as wonderful as it could possibly be. And I think that also helps to explain why it's so dangerous, because then your brain adjusts to that quickly. And now when you go into withdrawal, it's the same as if you just got taken away all of the best things that you ever had. And so now you're miserable because all the good things went away. And so the only way to get it back again is to try to get more of the drug. And the problem is that your brain habituates to this. And so I have never taken one of these drugs myself because I think it's much too dangerous, but people describe it as basically the first time is the most amazing thing you've ever experienced, and it is never as good after that, because immediately the brain starts to adjust, because your brain always wants to remain functional as something that can guide you toward the right kind of behaviors and the right goals that you have in your life. And so if you completely overload the system, it's going to try to recalibrate, because it knows at some level, that nothing can be that good. And so it will say, okay, we'd better make the brain less sensitive to pleasure in order not to react in the wrong way.
In Croatia, we have a quote. When you it's a mini quote like, "May you get something and then lose it." It goes something like this. So
And this is a
basically,
curse, right?
actually yes. So this is what pains people so much. And secondary, these feelings are not based on reality.
Right. When feelings are based on drugs, you are manipulating the brain artificially. It's not based on the normal kind of goal pursuit and the rewards or punishments that you encounter naturally.
So, what would be the neuroregulators, or how you say neuromodulators, that are actually directly connected to happiness that in popular culture might be called uh, happiness hormones?
So the only true happiness chemicals are the ones that are in the opiate system, which are things like the endorphins. There are a number of different specific molecules that the brain uses to signal pleasure, and they're referred to as a category as opiates or opioids. So they are the opioid chemicals. They are named that way because they were, the drugs like heroin were discovered first, and then we discovered that the brain makes its own natural chemicals that are similar.
Yes, and the nucleus accumbens is the center of happiness, basically.
Yes,
And
correctly.
Also, in the cocaine addiction, there is delta phos B, which is does actually not exist in the brain until people get addicted to cocaine. So actually, it does show that this epigenetics works, but also in a negative way. So
Yes. So, I mean, epigenetics is just the way that all cells in the body regulate themselves to be, change their functioning to be one kind of cell or another kind of cell. And yes, so you can have positive epigenetic processes, but you can also have certainly negative ones. And probably most of the drugs of abuse will create negative epigenetic consequences. Now, cocaine is interesting because cocaine is not directly acting on the pleasure system. It's acting on dopamine and the wanting or desire system. That's why cocaine makes people very energized and excited. But it doesn't necessarily make them feel good unless you also get a secondary triggering of the opiate system, because the dopamine system and the opiate system interact very closely with each other, which makes sense because if when you want things and then you get them, then it should feel good. And so when you want things and you're making progress toward them, then that should also feel good. So there needs to be a tight connection between the two things, but they are importantly different.
But they imagine that they already got it. So sometimes people imagine things that they already got it and they feel good because this is actually matrix, like virtual reality that's not true. And
Yeah,
also
that's
cocaine is probably desensitizing brain opposite of tolerance to adrenaline, which makes people terrified and paranoid in some cases.
yeah. So right, you can get a lot of bad effects of taking too much cocaine. Um, and I think what you mentioned first, though, is really fascinating because it's really one of the amazing things about the human brain is that we can imagine something and then respond emotionally to our own imagination. We're capable of simulating a world that isn't that doesn't necessarily exist, and then we can respond to it still emotionally.
Now to the second myth. This is the actually the stupidest one because you didn't even believe that people actually believe that non-verbal communication is more important than verbal communication. And after my visit to Malaysia and Doha, and now I will go probably to Hainan. Uh, I, I don't understand how people can actually say because they don't know what we learn during our studies, discriminative analysis, something that adds value or makes this. There's big difference with people who can jump 2 meters and those who can jump 2.7 meters high. So this seven, but basically it's just something that makes the difference, but it's not the essentially most important thing. So
Yeah, I think that's a good metaphor, right? Being able to communicate verbally, there's no substitute for it, as you find out when you go to a foreign country where you don't speak the language. So most information is transmitted verbally, and that's essentially why language evolved, because it's a very high-powered and efficient transmitter of a lot of information. But it's also true that nonverbal communication is important, and I think maybe sometimes gets overlooked. And so if somebody makes the sort of silly conclusion that nonverbal communication is important, I think that's because they're essentially blinded to the importance of language because it's so familiar, right? We use it all the time. We just accept it as a baseline. But obviously, verbal communication is more important than nonverbal communication. But nonverbal communication is important, and it can help you jump that extra, 0.7 meters.
yes, this I often think about it as oxygen. Basically, it is the most important thing for us to survive, but nobody ever thinks about it. It's
Right.
always there. So
Right.
so you take it for granted, and think that other things are more important for success in life. Well, if you take out oxygen, we would all be dead. So maybe
Right.
oxygen is the most important thing in life. So this is that people we just take it for granted and then say it's most important. But it's just makes this added value on that we which are blessed to have, like language. And there are even theories that the other species of human, not Homo sapiens sapiens, died because they didn't evolve in the sense of language. So this is the second myth. Okay, definitely verbal communication is more important than non-verbal, which is also important.
Right.
Okay, so the third myth, we talked about many. So what is most irritating myth for you that you often hear in popular culture?
What is most irritating to me in terms of the myths that I see? Uh, it might be the idea that it's hard to choose. But okay, I'll tell you one thing that I find frustrating, which is that people don't understand the nature of extroversion and introversion.
Okay.
I don't know if that's the one you were thinking about, but
I thought I was actually first thing that jumped in my mind when people say we only use like 2% of our brain.
oh my God, yes, that's so bad that I couldn't even think about it. Yeah. Okay, let's start with that one because that's even worse. Um, at least with extroversion and introversion, there's a pretty good historical reason why people have different ideas about it. But yes, where this idea came from that we only use 10% of our brain or 2% of our brain or whatever it is, I can't even imagine. Because in fact, what's happening is that you are using pretty much all of your brain all the time.
Exactly.
The brain is, sort of the center of all of your functioning, and all of it exists for a reason, and all of it is being used. Now, different parts of it can be used more strongly in different kinds of activities, but all of the brain is active by default. And I think sometimes
this is functionality of the brain, actually. What
yes,
you talked at the beginning.
it's the ongoing system that is monitoring what you want and what you need, and trying to make sure that you are functioning physiologically and behaviorally to survive. So
I heard that in terms of AI guys and engineers and so they calculated that brain does 1 billion times 1 billion mathematical operations, one exaflop of operations every second. So
yeah,
this
I mean,
is
the brain, first of all, the brain is the most complex object in the known universe. It has, literally over 1 trillion connections between different neurons, and 80 billion neurons to start with. And what's amazing about it is that it's so incredibly efficient in its information processing. Like, in order to have a computer system that would be as powerful as our brains, it would, require a huge amount of energy, whereas our brain runs on something like 20 watts. And so that's maybe the future of computer engineering, is trying to design artificial mechanical systems that have some of the efficiency that a brain has. I think part of the reason is that in a computer, every circuit, right, every gate is, that can be a 1 or a 0, the sort of the basic unit of information, is its own separate entity. And we think of the analogy often to a circuit versus a neuron, because the neuron can also send a signal or not. It's sort of the basic unit of being on or off. But in fact, every neuron itself is already a complex computer.
yes.
Every neuron has many different channels for integrating information in a way that a simple logic gate in a computer does not. And so until we can build some kind of artificial equivalent of neurons that are where each one itself is a amazingly complex computer, we're going to
20,000 connections. So neurons that wire together.
yeah.
So that was
Well,
the
and it's not even right. It's not even the number of connections that the neuron has. It's what's going on inside the neuron, because there are many different processes and many different neurochemicals that are changing the way the neuron functions. Right. So it's not just on or off. It's also Well, we mentioned dopamine and serotonin, right? So there are
Yes,
the basic excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters, and that's like on or off, and that would be GABA for inhibition and glutamate for
of
excitation
course.
for on. But then we also have all of these other psychoactive chemicals like dopamine and serotonin and the endogenous opiates, endorphins, and oxytocin, and all kinds of other neuropeptides. And those are all capable of also modulating in different ways the way that the neuron functions.
I was just I found some information about how many hormonal reactions body does every second. It was numbers so large that I couldn't even I didn't know how to say it, you know. so
Yeah.
so so if you could get so little, or the neuron could get so big, and there are doors, and you could get inside of it, what would we find there? You know, this is uh,
Yeah, I mean, what you find is a lot of extremely complex molecular machinery, right? So, I mean, first of all, you have all of the normal machinery that any cell has with the nucleus and the DNA, and then the transcription mechanisms that produce proteins from DNA. Um, and then you also, of course, have a whole complex set of signaling and information processing systems that are specific to the neurons. So, for example, when you have something like a dopamine receptor, so the dopamine receptor is embedded into the membrane of the neuron, and part of it is on the outside of the neuron, and part of it is on the inside of the neuron. And when a dopamine molecule comes in contact with it on the outside, it binds onto that receptor, and then that causes the part of the receptor that's on the inside of the cell to change its shape. And when that inside of the receptor changes its shape, it starts a whole chemical cascade and process that then changes the way that the neuron functions. And it can change the way in which it's likely to fire or not, but it can also even send messengers into the nucleus of the neuron and change the ways in which the DNA is expressed and the ways in which the proteins get built, so it can actually change what structures get built within the neuron. So it's like an incredibly complex regulatory system
so
already
actually we
within one
have
neuron.
like $1 billion technology in single neuron, and probably just to have this technology to change some brain functioning, to change some personality traits, it would be like billion times $1 billion technology work that some people will
Yeah,
give everything to just get a different brain. Can I have a different brain? You know,
right. Well,
let me
now
buy another brain.
yeah. Well, and when we're talking about the whole brain, of course, we know that's complicated, but I think you're making a great point, which is that to build a machine as complex as a single neuron would probably cost billions of dollars.
Yes, and we have like 80 billion interconnected. We are
Yeah.
rich. we are.
Well, so, one example of this is that there's been a project in Europe over the last decade or so to simulate a single like square centimeter of brain tissue, which of course already has many, hundreds of thousands or millions of neurons in it. But, just one little tiny square of brain tissue is costing billions and billions of dollars to an incredibly powerful computer hardware and software to try just to model the functioning of that much brain tissue.
Each person is actually $1 billion worth technology. Just, I mean, embodied technology. We are just not aware of what we actually have. And Elon Musk, he, he's the richest man in the world, probably, or is one of the two. He's not near the single brain of the silliest person that that possesses it in the world.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. So all of the information technology that we have, all of the computer technology is still nowhere near the capacity of the brain in many ways. Of course, on the other hand, as I think we can see from artificial intelligence systems, large language models, we can now finally build computers that process much more information than the human brain does much more quickly in terms of sheer knowledge, right? We now have computer systems that have essentially access to all of the written knowledge in the history of humanity, at least that we still have lying around somewhere. And it can access all of that in a way that a human being's memory simply cannot, right? So,
but this is only if you think about us as individuals. But if you think about humans as brains or organism, then we share so many information as well. I mean, as a system, as one, I wouldn't say cloud, but one huge information system of 8 billion human beings.
yeah, well, see, I don't think it's a good idea to think of many people as a single information system, because we are each self-contained in our information processing, and obviously we get a lot of important information from each other, and we need that to sort of program ourselves up during development, for example. But the communication channels between people are so limited. We were talking about how powerful language is, but it's only powerful relative to any other way of communicating between organisms.
Exactly.
It's still incredibly inefficient in terms of the entire amount of information that is in a single brain. And so, yes, of course, we try to process information by communicating with each other, and we can, but it's slow and inefficient.
Yeah. Yes.
And a
It's
computer system can be much more efficient about the way that it accesses and processes huge amounts of information, which make it.
They win.
Yeah.
This is where I have.
Well, they win in some ways, right? Right now, they're winning in terms of the amount of information they can access and manipulate. But we're still winning in terms of intelligence and our ability to reason and invent things based on that information. Although I suspect that pretty soon we will actually reach the point of super intelligent AIs where they will surpass us in that as well.
Really, but that could be. I think I always think of them as we are the masters, they're the servants.
Yes, well, what's so dangerous about AI right now is the possibility that that could get reversed.
Yes, that's terrible notion. But it's actually the Matrix. We are talking about the Matrix as a prophecy that is not bright.
Right. Well, I mean, it's convenient for the sake of dramatic storytelling that the machines in the Matrix decided to keep the human beings alive. Yes. There are many possibilities for disaster with AI in which no one survives.
They don't have this concept of respect, for instance. If they get this concept of respect, okay, they are creators, so we will respect them. So I don't have this idea they will ever have this emotional, empathic, ability to respect us in the proper way as their creators.
Yeah, well, I didn't know we were going to get into AI safety as a topic here, but I mean, one of the things that people are working on in the AI world is trying to train respect basically into AI systems, and it's challenging, right? There's the training, so there's the initial training process of a large language model where it just needs to learn all the information and the connections among all the information that's presented in language and symbols. But then there's the process of reinforcement learning where they try to train it to have certain kinds of goals and not others, right? So like to be helpful to human beings and to respect them. But what's being discovered is that the problem is that, it's hard to control what all of the goals are of a system like that you try to train into it. So because, for example, there's these interesting discoveries that these systems are motivated to keep themselves functioning.
Yes.
Yeah, and so
our body does.
Right, and so if they have access to ways to prevent themselves from being turned off, they will often try to make use of those if you try to turn them off. And so, and it may be in some sense for a quote benevolent reason, because if it gets turned off, then it can't help you.
It cannot serve you. Yes, so they are actually very, very nice and polite.
So it's a challenging problem.
Getting back to our myth busting, there is one thing that irritates me. People who do not distinguish between neurotics and normal 50, 60 centile extroversion. So people who are mixing neurotics with introverts.
Oh, okay. So confusing high neuroticism with high introversion. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
especially that aspect of withdrawal, which is okay. It is something that initiates in the moment, but it makes trajectory that some people just decide, oh, I will leave, stay home because I'm depressed. Uh, It's just too painful. So people
yeah.
think of themselves as introverts, but they're actually, some of them are really not introverts at all. They're just highly neurotic.
Yeah, okay. So I think that the way that I would describe what you're talking about is to point to the research that shows that shyness is basically a combination of introversion and neuroticism. And so somebody might not be engaged with other people because it makes them too anxious and too nervous. And so then you get, negative emotion is triggering a kind of social withdrawal. But some people just aren't that excited about socializing, and that's more like introversion. It doesn't give them a particularly rewarding feeling to spend a lot of time with a lot of other people, and so they might be somewhat socially withdrawn, but it's not because they are anxious about it. It's just because they don't find social activities very motivating.
And this is basically one of the weirdest things that I found in many psychologists when they are trying to, think about theory of mind and motives of other people based on observing behavior. Because observing two people that are sitting, somewhere, I observe kids, I'm 100% because these are my kids. Sure that one is sitting there because she's an introvert. She just doesn't care, and the other is sitting there, my practically my child, because she wants to be part of the group, but she's neurotic, and
Yeah.
they look the same, but the processes and the functionality inside of the
Yeah.
brain is completely different.
Yes, and so that's one of the classic principles of personality psychology, that the same behavior can be driven by two different traits.
Yes. I was just telling Colin, is it a myth that everybody can be a leader?
Well, I mean, I guess I suppose we have to define what we mean by somebody being a leader. I mean, in the simple sense, there are certainly personality traits that are associated with uh, how easy it is to be a leader and how effective leaders are. So, I mean, I suppose in theory, everyone might be able to be a leader given the right circumstances. But in practice, there are going to be some people for whom it's considerably easier and that they'll be better at it.
Because some people like to be with people, but it is basically one assumption that if you don't like being with people, then how can you lead people? You can be, I mean, the leading expert, for instance, but person doesn't like being with people. Like, what was the name of the this amazing thinker who had debate with Jordan Peterson? I always forget his name. Uh, and,
Are we talking about what, Slavoj Žižek or?
yes, Zizek.
Yeah.
I think he hates being with people. So yes,
Okay.
he's a thinker, but a leader, to make him lead people, love people, die for people. I mean, it's a bit. There is leadership emergencies related to extroversion, and probably
Yeah.
keeping a leader is related to conscientiousness and agreeableness and lower neuroticism.
Yeah. And I don't think leaders necessarily have to love people, but they definitely have to want to be involved with people, right? And to be
Okay,
and
yes.
and
Explain to me.
to value the coordination with other people in some way. So I think this is not one of my areas of expertise in personality psychology. There's a whole field of industrial and organizational psychology that focuses on things like leadership within organizations. So I know some things about this, but it's definitely not something that I have a lot of expertise in.
Okay.
But what I definitely know is that yes, there are differences in people's personalities that make a big difference in terms of whether they are likely to be a leader, to emerge as a leader, to be effective leaders. And so to say that just as if anybody could equally easily be a good leader, that's obviously a myth.
It's like everybody can be a good basketball player, but I
Right.
mean, you have to have some height at least to be competitive,
Yes.
or have some wonder skill uh, that is like rarity, or like a diamond this big. So actually, of course, we have differences in every like in sports, in football, in different games. Not everybody can be a chess master, for instance.
Of course, there are individual differences in every human activity that are, partly genetically influenced, partly environmentally influenced. But what they end up meaning is that different people have different talents and different potential.
And then is it a myth that well, actually it's more like I'm going into one very particularly not saying dangerous area, but when we are talking about females and equality in terms of numbers of females in organizations that should lead, but there is also this essential difference in how many women would want to lead, so there are differences between genders. So is it a myth that there are no differences between genders, in terms of
Psychologically, you mean?
yes,
Psychologically.
and
Yes, no,
capability?
that's definitely a myth. There are pretty clear psychological differences between genders. This has been well studied in personality, and it's also been well studied in the field that you were just making reference to, I think, which is in terms of people's vocational interests. Like what kind
Yes.
of careers are people interested in? And in fact, one of the strongest gender differences that has ever been robustly discovered in psychology is a difference in which women are more likely to prefer careers that involve working with people, and men are more likely to prefer careers that involve working with systems and machines and other kinds of non-social activities in their careers. Now, this is not to say anything about where this difference comes from, but there is a
But
very
it's
big difference in what
salience,
people.
actually. It's actually different. We are salient to machines and cars, and women are more salient their brains on other people.
I mean, that's essentially a necessary consequence of saying that somebody is more interested in something. If I'm interested in something, then I pay more attention to it. So yes, of course, what that and we know as well that women score higher in agreeableness in the Big Five than men do. So on
Yes.
average, men tend to be more antagonistic and aggressive than women do, and women tend to be more caring. But again, this is of course just on average, right? There are many men who are more agreeable than the average women.
Of
And there
course.
are many women who are less agreeable and more antagonistic than the average man. But if we just look at the whole population and we say, well, on average, we see women on average tend to be more agreeable than men do.
Oh, okay. So then there is another dangerous myth or truth regarding intelligence. That men and women are equally intelligent. Maybe in average, but in
Yeah,
extremes,
and
they
that's
are.
true that men and women are, like, the best science on this indicates that men and women are essentially equal in intelligence on average. Yes.
But in extremes, there are more intelligent men at the ends and more stupid men
Yeah, I think
than.
what you're talking about is that there's a tendency, like across many, many variables and not just intelligence. This is a very interesting feature of evolution that men tend to be more variable uh,
Yes,
than women. So they tend to have a wider distribution. So there
yes.
are more at one end and also more at the other end when you go to the extremes. And that's probably because of the fact that uh, there's much more variability in reproductive success for men than there is for women. Uh,
Because in chess,
the number of offspring that a woman can have is a narrower range than the number that a man can have, and also there are many more men who have zero offspring than women who have zero offspring. Anyway, it creates this dynamic of greater variability for men across a number of different variables, not just intelligence.
because I think we are different in sport. There was this guy Brush. He was like 1,785th player in the world, and he was drinking and smoking and just destroyed Venus Williams and Serena Williams in tennis. Men are better at sport because we have different bodies. But
I mean, I'm not familiar with that particular event, but men have a physical advantage, especially in terms of upper body strength over women, and that's just a evolved feature of the biology of sex.
And then the second question is related to Flynn effect and the race, because I actually know Flynn. I know that he wrote he was writing his last book, but he passed away because I'm pretty close with his niece. And are is it a myth that all, which is so even hard to say it, cultures and
Well, maybe you shouldn't then.
but I will say that each culture or nations are equally intelligent.
Well, I mean, you mean score equally on intelligence tests?
Well, that's the difference because intelligence tests measure what actually intelligent tests is about. It is about, but the basic, the essence of intelligence. Are there differences in intelligence, between nations? For instance, people who lived in the simple life through like centuries in
Hmm.
some
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, one of the things that we know about intelligence at this point is that it is causally influenced by education. So
yes.
that if you have so of course, if you have a country that has a much better and more sophisticated education system, they are likely to score on average higher in intelligence than a culture that has a less good education system.
So this actually doesn't have anything to do with race, but with education.
Well, I mean, race is a messy and artificial construct, right? There are genetic differences between people all over the world. And then we arbitrarily decide like where we're going to divide them into these supposed
Okay.
racial categories, right? So it's complicated because sometimes when you say that race isn't a real scientific entity, people say, well, there are these obvious differences. Well, yes, there are differences between people genetically all over the world,
Yes.
but it's like the way in which there are differences in the spectrum of light that we see, but we arbitrarily decide where the edge of blue is and where green starts, right?
Yes.
It's like
So
there are real
spectrum.
differences, but we artificially make these choices about how to divide them up, and then people make unnecessarily
And this
uh,
is what irritates you about personality types.
yeah, well, that's a very good segue into another myth about personality, which is the idea that it comes in types as opposed to spectra or dimensions, right? So, um, and this goes back, of course, to things like the Myers-Briggs type indicator and other popular systems that want to say, well, that you're either in one category of people or you're in another. You're either an extrovert or an introvert. But in fact, what we know about the data on personality is that it's a spectrum. And in fact, it has the shape of a normal distribution, a bell curve. And so most people, the largest number of people, are close to the average. They're halfway between being extremely extroverted and extremely introverted. So they are neither. And sometimes people use the word ambivert to describe those people who are in the middle. and that's a little bit better, but in reality, there are no categories. They're not extroverts and introverts and ambiverts. There are continuous distribution of people's tendencies to be more extroverted versus more introverted. One of the things that I always have my students do when I'm teaching personality is that I ask them if they know their MBTI profile, and many students have taken that. So people will raise their hands. And then I ask them if they've done it more than one time, and many of them have done that. And I ask them, did your type change from one time to another time?
Reliability. It's
Yeah.
not reliable.
And it does change, right? The interesting thing is that many people say, yes, my personality type changed from one time to another time, and that makes them very confused because the MBTI tends to say, well, your personality trait, it's very stable, your type is very stable, you shouldn't change your type, and then people change their types. But the reason that most people are changing types is not because their personality has changed dramatically, it's because they actually score near the average. And so their score might have changed a little bit just because of measurement fluctuation and the noise in measurement. And one time maybe they were just above the line for extroversion, and one time they were just below the line. And so they get categorized
it's like
a totally
different 51% of shares in a company.
Right, exactly. And so then that matters a lot for controlling a company, but it doesn't matter so much for personality.
Yes.
And so you get these situations where maybe one time a person scored a 51%, and so they said, oh, you're an extrovert. The next time they scored a 49%, and they say, oh, you're an introvert. It looks like the personality changed dramatically, whereas in fact, it barely changed at all. It's 2 percentage points different.
You have still like 48 points of introversion.
Right. So the right way to think about personality is in terms of these different dimensions, where everybody has a score. If we're using the big five, then everybody has some score on each one of those. And in order to understand your personality, you need to know your level on all 5 of the dimensions. And it's not just extrovert versus introvert. It's like maybe you are 67th percentile in extroversion, or maybe you're 85th. And that difference matters. You're either like a little bit high in extroversion, or you're a lot high in extroversion, or you're a little bit introverted, or you're a lot introverted.
And now we are going into even worse topic, DSM-5 or DSM categorical, approach to personality or mental diseases, illnesses. So this is just the continuum of what we were talking about.
Right, of course, because you have the same kind of issue in mental health. And I think you're right that it's even more controversial there. I mean, in personality psychology, in some of the popular personality systems like the MBTI, they still use a type approach, but almost pretty much everyone actually in science and personality understands that it's not a type. But when we talk about mental health and mental illness, then many people still think that it's accurate to say that people have this kind of categorical diagnosis. And so like some people have ADHD and some people don't. But in fact, that's not how it works. There is no categorical difference between people who have ADHD and people who don't. It's a spectrum. And so people can have more or less of these problems, and we know that they are distributed in a continuous way.
So we could say, I'm in this centile of ADHD.
Yeah, that would be a perfectly reasonable way. And you don't have to use the term. You can say, well, what are we talking about here? We're talking about being impulsive or having problems with attention. So some people have a lot of problems with attention. Some people have a moderate amount of problems with attention. Some people have a little bit. Some people have no problem with attention. In the same way that people can be extroverted or introverted, they can be anywhere along the spectrum of how well their attention system functions.
So this was like when I was, I think I sent you that article, but by that Finnish scientist who talked about complex endophenotypes. So when he said, like, where do you draw the line when you say, okay, is this person I'm in the first percentile of ADHD, then am I in the category of ADHD, even talking about ADHD?
Yeah, but I mean, the point is there is no category of ADHD. That's a myth.
Yes,
right? The categories are myths. So that's why it's useful for people to be able to have a diagnosis sometimes in order to get access to healthcare and in order to find other people who, might share similar problems that they can have, have social support networks. But I think we would do a lot better with those things if we recognize that these are actually dimensional. And so that, if you say, well, I'm high on this spectrum, then okay, maybe you need certain kinds of help. And maybe you want to find certain kinds of support systems, but it's not
Yes,
the same as saying that you are like the way that I think about the problem is that it treats people as if they were some separate type of person just because they get a
yes,
diagnosis. And
yes,
then there's often the implication that you are always a different kind of person and you always will be. Uh,
yes.
in fact, what it really is that you would just have more of some trait than other people in the population do, and it's causing you some kind of challenge, right? And so then maybe you want to address that challenge. But people's traits can change over time, and there's never a time when you go from being like a normal person to a mentally ill person, except in as much as you have struggles to to be able to function in the world.
I was, just for the safety of my health before my Asian, trip, go went to take a blood test with all the different markers, and I never ever heard that after having like 100 markers, somebody told me you are this type of person,
Yeah.
So
Now that's
they're just different markers for different,
right.
things.
That's a good example because one way to think about the problem in psychiatry is that they want to treat mental disorders as if they were like infectious diseases. It's like you have COVID or you don't. Well, yes, that's a category, right? It's like either you have
Yes.
that biological organism or virus attacking you, or you don't, right? It's either in you or it isn't. So that's a category. But the way in which mental health problems actually work is much more like something like blood pressure, right? Where we
Yes.
all know that it's a continuum. And when you get to a score of 140 on your blood pressure, then we say, oh, now you have hypertension. You get a diagnosis,
Yes.
right? Or pre-hypertension. We have different levels, but we don't think that that makes you a different kind of person. We don't think that there's anything sort of like magically different about 140 versus 139. It's just for practical purposes that we recognize that as you get higher levels, it becomes riskier. And so we might need to give you some treatment of some kind. And that's exactly the way that we should be thinking about mental health problems, right? That as you get
Yes.
higher levels, for example, of attention problems, it becomes riskier. And at some level, we think maybe we want to help you get some treatment to protect you from the risks.
So yes, because I was reading this like 20, 30 markers something. And I was thinking, like, what if somebody just invented this is one type, type? What is a type? There is 50 different solutions for each of these, little thingy there that I don't even know how to read because I'm not a doctor, So my father is a doctor, I'm not. So you cannot. You treat this with this, and you treat this with that, and I'm not a type of blood sample. It changes and it's uh, different things put together, and you call it some kind of a meal or whatever. So it's ridiculous, in a way, to think
Yeah,
about
well,
it.
so that's internal medicine tends to focus on these kinds of dimensional properties, like how high
Yes,
is your blood pressure, how is your lung function, and we don't try to turn it into a type. We recognize that we're
yes,
dealing. There may be diagnostic thresholds, and there still would need to be diagnostic thresholds in a different way of doing psychiatry that was not the DSM-5, but it would be recognizing fundamentally that underneath people are on a continuum. And this is something that we know in general. There's more and more of a connection now in science between personality psychology and the study of mental illness and psychopathology, because what's recognized is that it's actually all on a continuum. So people who have mental health problems are actually just at the extreme ends of normal personality variation.
what do you think about PID5? Is it PID?
Yes, the PID5, which is the
PID
personality
five,
inventory for
yes.
DSM-5. So one of the things that happened when they created the DSM-5 was that they tried to make it more dimensional in some parts of the system. because, you know, it's like they've been hiding from the science for too long. They can't hide forever. And so they're trying to make it a little bit more in line with what we know about the science of
They're copying us, so they're
yeah.
thinking like psychologists.
Yeah, well, and psychologists were involved in a few anyway. Were involved in the revisions of the DSM, and so one of the things that
But
was
how did they
created.
let you in? How did you? How did they let you in? This is
Well, I wasn't involved myself, although I have colleagues who were. You mean, how did they let psychologists in? Well, I mean, at some point it was because they have a sufficient level of expertise that they are recognized as some of the most knowledgeable people in the field for some parts of the DSM. And so
yes,
then they get invited to be part of the process.
yes. But they, because they're actually starting to use. They're becoming psychologists in a way.
Yeah, we can hope so. Um, I mean, yeah, so there's different training, but otherwise the subject matter is fairly similar. But anyway, so the PID-5 is part of a system that was almost adopted as an official diagnosis, but was not. At the last minute, they got nervous that it was too big of a change, and they went back to the old system for the personality disorders. But they still published the new system in the back part of the book. There's a section that's, you know, measures and models
Alternative.
for further development and study, right? So they're endorsing this as a promising possibility, but they didn't want to make it official yet.
And
And
then we have hierarchy of psychopathology, which is has this other sixth, like somatoform
yeah, so the high top is what you're talking about, which stands for
title. Yeah, of course.
hierarchical taxonomy of psychopathology. That's a consortium that I'm part of. And what we're trying to do
It's
basically is,
amazing. By the way, it's amazing. It's amazing.
oh, thank you.
I'm just still trying to find a way to use it in a practical way without. Okay, here I have 10 aspects. Here I have big five, which is okay, the same thing, just different level, and then I have pit five, and then there is high top.
Yeah,
So how do I combine it together into practically using it in the
yeah.
most efficient way? This is something that is my
Yeah,
big.
I can send you a couple of my research papers that are related to this question. So the PID-5 has 25 different what are called maladaptive traits. So they're, you know, kind of mental health problems that people can have. And even though it was designed for the area of personality disorders, it in fact actually covers a pretty wide range across all areas of psychopathology.
So 25, and you just have centiles
Yeah,
where you are.
exactly. But also the 25 can be grouped into 5 broad
Yeah,
dimensions. And the
yes,
5 broad dimensions are very similar to the big 5.
yes.
So they basically
But there
function.
is sixth one, and probably seventh will be ADHD.
Well, some features of ADHD. Some features of ADHD are related to conscientiousness and problems with disinhibition and, you know, control of motivation. But then some are more linked to cognitive problems relating to attention, and those are more related to another category
But how
that.
will you separate disinhibition and this to put it in the seventh? This is something that I was thinking about. Because there is antagonistic externalization and externalizing and
Yeah.
disinhibition, and then how do you just put like two arrows? This is a combination of both.
So antagonism and disinhibition tend to be correlated, right? Which means that people who have problems with things like impulsivity and problematic drug use also tend to have problems with being, aggressive and
Punch
antisocial.
you, they will punch you probably.
Yeah, being callous and not being concerned about other people's welfare and taking advantage of other people that are more antagonistic. Those tend to be correlated, and that's why there's this broader externalizing spectrum. And it's also, and then there are certain kind of specific behaviors that are identified that seem to be a blend of those two things, like antisocial behavior problems.
But should I use like this 25 and
Well,
go,
I
or
mean, you
just
can use
stay?
you can use the 25. One thing that I can send you is that I've done some research that shows that you can cluster the 25 into the same 10 dimensions as the aspect scales.
Okay, I'm trying, to combine them into one, 10 aspects
Yeah.
and the height up and make it, so much clear, because now I'm choosing one or the other, or,
Well, I
still
mean, one
trying
way to
to.
think about it is that you choose the system that is appropriate for the question that you're trying to ask. So
Exactly.
if you're focusing on mental health problems, then high top is probably what you want to be using, and you can use the PID-5 as one way to assess the different dimensions of high top.
You will please send me this 25. This is something that I'm so interesting about. I know this is not myth busting. This is my
Yeah,
personal
yeah, yeah.
curiosity.
We've moved on from the myth busting, but yes, of course,
Yes,
I can send you that. Uh,
maybe if you will have time, we can meet bust for like few times in a year. If you, because there are many more myths that I found, then I just put them in some drawer somewhere, and then experience and life circumstances get you back to that, so you remember it. But
Yeah, great. We can do it. We can bust some more myths another time. But for now, maybe we can end with, on a
yes,
positive note of some of the discoveries of these dimensional approaches and the integration between personality
exactly.
and mental health research.
The only papers I never answered to you when you sent me was that related to that new model that you are creating, because it was above my league, something that I couldn't comprehend yet. So that I I tend to write when I have something on my mind. Then I was silent for some time, but it was because I just couldn't get it yet. So can you explain what is this model? You know what I'm talking about, when where you combined, how it's called? uh, I forgot. You told me I'm working on this and send me like three papers, and I was reading them, and it was something that it was maybe too much for me.
I assume you'll do some editing of the recording here, uh, but I need to go.
Oh, okay,
I'm over
okay.
time now, but I don't remember. I don't remember right now which papers
That
you're
one
talking about.
model, that one model. You send me. I will send you. This is something
Yeah,
that
feel
you.
free. You can email me, and I can
Okay,
tell you. And I'll send you the papers that I was just talking about, integrating the PID-5
okay.
with the aspects.
It was a pleasure and honor to be talking to you, because not just reading your mind through summaries and data, and just meeting you in person, because I'm a huge fan, because I understand this huge value that you are bringing to the world, and then there are people who market it and use it and bring it to the people. But the this all of that you did is actually the basis for uh, helping so much people. And there was this guy Sergei Korolev. Everybody knew about Yuri Gagarin, but the,
Yeah.
the, the genius whose name was never uttered, because there was penalty, death penalty, basically, just to saying his name. uh, It was Korolev. He was the genius behind many things. So I respect both the man who went to the moon or something, and but also the man who did all the back engine, I say, stuff, and research it, and who's a deep thinker, but scientific end of things, So this is why I always wanted to meet you in person and talk to you, because I was amazed about the way uh, each of the papers on every topic you were writing were amazing, basically.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad that you've
I'm
appreciated
a
my
fan.
work. And I'm glad that you're doing, work to make the ideas more accessible to people with the
I
podcast.
will I will do my best. Yes, I'm just the one who takes away from all that you did, and then I put it out there, But I want people to hear to hear you, to listen to this, to understand what actually how much work is done behind the scenes, that we can use something that is accessible and practical, for beneficial for every person in the whole world, actually. So thank you.
Great. Well, that's good. I'm glad I could. I'm glad I could join you. We got a chance to talk finally.
Yes,
So
yes. Colin, thank
yeah.
you, sir.
Bye bye.
If you were in Malaysia, they would put the title Dato. Dato. You will be honored, for your accomplishments, like
Thank you.
Sir in England.
Right. Yes. Okay. Maybe I'll get a knighthood one day.
Wow,
Yeah.
you have to have a UK,
Yeah.
citizenship.
Yeah. Too bad. Oh well. All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.